Well, the big pro-Second Amendment rally that was planned in Virginia today went off without a hitch. I have been waiting to discuss this whole issue because I wanted to see how it would actually end up. I mean, there were plenty of people speculating about what would happen. Lots of folks in the media were characterizing this as a planned neo-Nazi rally or / white nationalist rally, saying that there would be neo-Nazis in attendance, which I have to say is one of the most sort of misleading ways of framing anything imaginable. But of course, you would expect nothing less from the American media at this point. You could say that almost about any, because of, statistically speaking, if there's going to be a rally with thousands of people, I guess sure there's a chance that one of them might be a neo-Nazi. So you could say, well, neo-Nazis are expected to attend. And of course, this is a very good way of trying to discredit the rally before it ever happens. To say that, well, no matter what happens on Monday, all these people are neo-Nazis, so their opinions don't matter, and you shouldn't listen to them. Anyone who doesn't believe in gun control is a neo-Nazi. That's the standard we're down to now. Black guys who own guns, they're neo-Nazis now. The Black Panthers, they're neo-Nazis now. The Pink Pistols, that gay gun owner group, they're, I guess, neo-Nazis now. I think that the media has ruined the term neo-Nazi and diluted it even more quickly than they did the term racist. Or maybe it's just because we already knew this playbook because of their whole debacle in using the term racist and applying it to anyone they didn't like or anyone whose views they wanted to discredit, so that maybe everyone just caught on quicker once they started calling everyone neo-Nazis. Or perhaps it's just because calling someone a Nazi just sounds so ridiculous, in the context of modern America. I mean, the way things have been going, the media would have you believe that about 50% of this country has gone full American History X. But of course, since that is not the case, this rally in Virginia was quite peaceful. You had normal, well-adjusted people, all sorts of folks, people with different skin colors, yes, probably people with different religions, and certainly people from different political parties. This is not necessarily just a Republican thing, as we've seen with the sanctuary. The whole Second Amendment sanctuary movement in Virginia, there have been, Democrat-leaning areas that have passed these resolutions. There has been majority black cities that have passed these resolutions. And that's because, gun ownership is something that, sort of goes across all walks of life. All sorts of different people own guns, even people who might disagree on other issues. And sadly, this is something that, the NRA totally neglects, and they've turned themselves essentially into a Republican super PAC that likes to talk about guns, but they certainly are not a pro-gun group. I think Gun Owners of America is, as I've said so many times, is much better at that, at trying to include other people and to make it very clear that they're a one-issue organization and that, their goal is to stop, gun confiscation and to promote this, gun rights and not to talk about socialism all the time like the NRA does. But despite the NRA and all their bungling of this and trying to promote the idea that, sort of the Second Amendment is only supported by, red-blooded Republicans who eat meat and like bacon, the fact of the matter is that, the pro-gun community is a pretty broad coalition. And when you try to come for people's guns, you're going to get significant pushback because, and that's why I say that, gun confiscation is something that's not really practical. That is the end of the line for our current regime. If they ever tried to implement anything like that, and they really went after it, not this, this piddly incrementalism. And frankly, I'm glad to say that people are starting to wake up to the incrementalism, because for a long time they could get away with this, just sort of slowly eroding people's rights. But I guess in Virginia, they're pushing hard enough all at once that people are realizing that there is a true threat to this. Because, the way they normally try and get these things through is they say, like, oh, well, we're not going after all gun owners. We're just going to go after this small little segment here, and we're just going to bite off these little, you're going to nibble at the corners and the edges and start, getting at people on the fringe. And then eventually, you've, over time, consumed all, gun owners in America. It's like the old the old poem about Nazi Germany. First they came for the trade unionists, and I wasn't trade unionist, and it's very cheesy. When people try and cite that, that's normally done in not so appropriate circumstances, to where it really is ridiculous to compare things to the Nazis. But this actually is I think, a decent comparison, to where you're trying to you're trying to scoop up different segments of the gun-owning community. Trump's bump stock ban is a very good example of this. It's like, oh, well, if you don't own a bump stock, why do you care? I'm, for example, I'm one of those people. I've never owned a bump stock. I had no intention of buying a bump stock. Even though they're gone now, I don't really want one. But it's still my right to purchase one if that's what I choose. And so, thankfully, that's, the message that was sent by the people in Virginia today. I think that it was a great show of solidarity, and it shows that, people are united in trying to protect their Second Amendment rights, and that they don't want them to be eroded in any way. And frankly, I couldn't be happier with the way things turned out today. I was a bit afraid that after all the media hype about this being a neo-Nazi rally, that people would be afraid to attend, and that attendance would be sparse, and in which case any unsavory elements would be accentuated, because they are going to show up regardless. If you're telling people that this is a neo-Nazi rally, well, you're not going to deter neo-Nazis from attending. You're going to deter normal, well-adjusted people from attending. But thankfully, because nobody trusts the media anymore, because the media is losing a lot of its power, they still are incredibly powerful, but not nearly as powerful as they used to be. They don't have the trust of the ordinary citizen, particularly of ordinary gun owners, since the media is virulently anti-gun across the board. People did not buy into this narrative. You had as recently as yesterday, there was an NBC reporter who made a whole tweet thread in which he was referring to this, uncritically and unironically, as a neo-Nazi rally that was going to go down tomorrow, and how we as journalists need to be careful not to give them too much attention and become heroes by promoting their cause. And he said this, it's almost. I mean, he had to have known that there were going to be at least 50% of the country that was completely outraged by his statements and how polarizing and biased, he was being. And yet these people, I think they just don't care, because they can't see too far beyond their own bubble, their own community, and the people that they speak to. And guns are one of the issues where this is most prevalent, because it's very obviously a rural versus urban issue. Urban people generally, if you live in New York, there's a cop on every corner. New York City is a police state. And so, of course, it makes sense that, journalists based in New York don't believe that anyone should own guns, because, oh my gosh, what do you need guns? We have the police for that, because they're a bunch of bootlickers. But if you live, a little bit outside town, and it might take 30 minutes for the police to respond to a call, you tend to be a little more self-reliant when it comes to these sorts of things. And when you're someone who doesn't rely on the government for protection primarily, well, then you tend to be a little more skeptical of the government. You realize that they are. And so that's why you'll never really heal this divide, because it is a fundamental difference between, different parts of the country. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with living in New York City and not wanting to own a gun and just relying on the NYPD if you're comfortable with the NYPD. Frankly, I tend to be, one of the people who's a little more skeptical of authority. But in a free country, having people who think differently and feel differently and act differently is not a problem. It's only a problem when you have this, this hegemonic, centrally controlled, all-powerful state that really only serves to tear us all apart. Now, back to what this means for the media. I think that this was a terrible defeat for the mainstream media in America. They wanted very badly for their Nazi, violent, terrible, actually Governor Northam, in concert with the media, was alluding to the possibility. Actually, I think he outright said it, that this could be Charlottesville 2.0, which of course was that, what they like to call the deadly neo-Nazi rally. And so they were hoping that this would be some kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Maybe if they said enough times that all these ordinary, regular people were neo-Nazis, well, maybe some actual neo-Nazis would show up and cause some trouble. But that didn't even end up happening. In fact, I heard rumors of people saying, "Oh, don't go to this rally," because there's going to be, Fed/Antifa saboteurs in the crowd. They're going to try and start fights, and then they're going to blame it on gun owners, and this will be terrible. This will make us look bad, and the exact opposite happened. Nothing bad happened. And this was a total defeat for the media because they were exposed as, making baseless smears against all these people before anything had ever happened. And, no matter how hard they lie, I mean, they have no real way of spinning this as a neo-Nazi rally, as anything bad, as anything other than ordinary people, standing up to protest the government usurpation of their human rights. And so I think it's safe to say that this is the worst media defeat since Joker. If you remember, in the weeks leading up to the premiere of Joker, the movie, they were saying how, oh my gosh, this movie's been adopted by the incels. There's going to be terrible violence all over theaters. There's probably going to be people who shoot up the theaters. All these Joker fans are deranged, terrible, single, lonely white men. And, of course, none of that came true either. Joker did exceedingly well. I believe it was the highest-grossing R-rated movie of all time. And so the consumer, the average moviegoer, completely rebuked all of the media's smears. And every time the media suffers a defeat like this, their power gets weaker and weaker because they no longer have that same influence. What they say is no longer the truth, and it's quite obvious to everyone. So they lose that power of, issuing these self-fulfilling prophecies. They can't merely speak their smears into existence anymore. And so I think it's safe to say that today is a great day, not just for gun owners, but for all Americans, because it is a day in which the media has less power over us. Now, in the future, I will be monitoring, of course, where things go in Virginia. Virginia seems to be experiencing sort of a... it kind of reminds me of a bleeding Kansas, of course, without the blood. But it's a place where you have, supporters and opponents, facing up or squaring up on the most controversial issue, in our country. And today it's guns, and back, in the 1850s, it was slavery. And, of course, back then, the overture to the Civil War was performed in Kansas, where they essentially did have their own civil war. It was a fight between settlers who were pro or anti-slavery to determine whether or not Kansas was going to be a free state or a slave state. And so, if things continue down this road and things, continue to escalate, and the Virginia state legislature and the governor continue to push forward with all this, well, then, they risk the possibility of a similar situation playing out in Virginia. Of course, now the question is, will Virginia be a police state or a free state? So if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. If you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.